Hello, this is Oleksii with UATV broadcasting from Toronto, Canada. The Ukraine Reform Conference is taking place here, so our team, in cooperation with Agri-Team Canada, is launching a special series of interviews about the effectiveness of current reforms in Ukraine. So today we would like to discuss the deregulation reform, and joining us in the studio is Oleksii Dorogan. He's the CEO of the Better Regulation Delivery Office. Hello and thank you for being with us today, Mr. Dorogan.
Thank you for having me.
So before we start our discussion, I would like our audience to have some video introduction to this reform. Let's watch. So the first myth to bust, usually people think that deregulation is only about businesses that are being constantly supervised or inspected by the regulatory bodies. Is it true or false?
So we normally think about deregulation in terms of better regulation. So this is actually regulation that is fit for purpose. So it achieves the objective, the policy objective, the safety, the fire-free buildings, stuff like this, at a minimal cost. So better regulation brings quality and safe services and goods to the people while making sure that there is a level playing field and the businesses can grow and develop and sustain.
Great. So what is behind the term deregulation? Could you decrypt more about this better services, about this progress?
Sure. So deregulation is about reducing the regulatory burden. So in simple terms, let's imagine a kiosk where you are making coffee. I'm buying coffee from you. So there is a set of rules that govern how you should prepare this coffee. And depending on in what country you're working, this can range from a paranoid level where you are basically not allowed to open a coffee shop without a civil servant, an inspector coming in and then perhaps maybe staying even in the kiosk. And on the other side of the balance, there are countries where this is incredibly easy to open a coffee shop because coffee shops are not so risky, so you just open it and just get some minimal paperwork. So deregulation is about reducing that paperwork and reducing bureaucracy to ensure that businesses can thrive. While better regulation is a balancing act between the cost for the businesses and the objective for the consumers.
So basically, your job is to analyze and to check all of the acts, norms, and standards that are being implemented in Ukraine, and basically to get rid of the ones who are unneeded and who only are serving as kind of stumbling blocks for businesses to be open and to prosper.
Yeah, that's fair to say. We analyzed thousands of regulations in Ukraine.
How many have you lifted, and how many have you adopted so far?
So 1,200 regulations that were either outdated or illegal have been abolished over the past 3 years.
1,200?
Yes.
Is this the legacy from the Soviet Union? Excuse me.
A lot of it is legacy from Soviet Union, but a lot of this is still stuff adopted in independent Ukraine.
For example, just give our audience some glimpse on some paradox, maybe some kind of unusual inspection that would never take place in a normal, prosperous society.
So the oldest act that was abolished is from 1923, and it was not publicly available, even though the relevant state authorities issue letters saying that you have to comply with it, and you will be fined for failure to comply with it. And the act has been prescribing types of jobs for which companies had to give out employees old-style soap. So I'm not sure how to translate this in English, but this is basically soap from the 50s, right? So not a very good soap. And only the largest plants that have been working for dozens of years have been complying with it. And we found a a family member of a colleague that had a garage full of this soap because he didn't have a use for it, and all of the other companies didn't comply because this was not publicly available, and it's now cancelled. Of course, if the independent government in Ukraine wants to create some rules on demonstrate why and how, and probably not use the old style unusable soap from the 50s.
Well, this is interesting. And on the opposite side, you also implement amendments to the legislation or to the norms and acts that are currently acting in Ukraine, right? So, could you please tell us some of them that you are proud the most?
So we have ensured the adoption of more than 60 such regulations and initiatives. The most recent ones have been issued by the President Zelensky a couple of weeks ago. The two flagship changes that were issued by the President were the cancellation of fines for cash management from the 90s. So at that time, the President had special powers to issue decrees on economic issues, which no longer exists because it's not the job of the President to regulate economic issues by decree. It's the job of the Parliament and of the Cabinet. So companies have been incredibly frustrated with this, and there are at this point there are $400 million in fines in courts for these cash management fines. So
$400 million.
That's 4 times more than the IT industry generates in taxes in Ukraine. So
this is an insane figure.
So and the second flagship initiative, we have reduced the minimal prices for notary services for real estate transactions. So this was 1%, and this was not serving the free market. There were a lot of cases where, for large, even for state transactions, a private notary could get a huge rainfall of money just because he was chosen to provide the notarial services for the sale of a plant. And in normal private-to-private transactions, no notaries used to provide basically kickbacks, like discounts that were of questionable legal nature. So these are two initiatives that have been adopted most recently. I'm also very proud of launching mobile payments. So the changes that the cabinet has adopted and we have drafted unlocked the mobile payments in Ukraine.
What does it mean? So basically you have a credit on your mobile phone and you can pay with it for some kind of goods in the supermarket.
So the problem was that there was a tax for charging up your mobile phone, right? So topping up your mobile phone. So this was 8%. Of course, if you're using the credits for mobile payments, 8% is a lot of money. Nobody would use this, so mobile operators never implemented this because of this 8%. So we have introduced a mechanism that would allow to exempt the money, the credit that goes to mobile payments from this 8%. So this is actually now competitive with other modes of transfer, and which has allowed one of the 3 largest mobile operators to launch the service in Ukraine.
So this mobile payments, what else?
Well, there's also a pretty stupid rule about mixing grain. So there are Ukrainian classes of grain that date back from the Soviet times and international. And of course, if you're exporting grain, you're using the international one. Contract, you have one of the international ones. Unfortunately, the Ukrainian regulation was making local grain classes mandatory for storage of all grain in Ukraine. So you could not mix the local grain types and then export this in accordance with the international grain types. Because this was not one-to-one, there were some changes, and this has been costing a lot of money for
the storage of these grains would cost a lot of money, right?
We have also been working with the software industry in Ukraine, and the largest pain point that they were telling us was immigration. So we have actually improved the process of getting an immigration visa. So now foreigners would be able to come to Ukraine on a visa-free regime or even on a touristic visa and get an immigration visa in Kiev. and get all the other paperwork in Kiev. Before
But
that, he
we
used
should
to travel
explain
back
the
and forth.
audience, yes, that usually foreigners had to go out of the country, then go to the consulate, Ukrainian consulate in some other country, and apply for this postvydka, right, for the permanent residence permit. And only then they could come back to Ukraine and continue working. So yes, this is interesting. This will simplify, and maybe foreigners won't be scared of Ukraine, right? Just to come to Ukraine for some kind of working purposes. But you remembered President Volodymyr Zelensky, and I would like to mention that he is actually a vocal supporter of this reform. He has lifted around 160, if I'm not mistaken, decrees and orders of previous presidents for the sake of the deregulation reform. And he stated that he wants Ukraine to be the country of mobile apps. So how does this position help you to continue implementing this reform, and what kind of the agenda maybe you have already discussed with the leader of the country?
So the common theme on the conference that we have heard was that protection of property rights and rule of law are incredibly important for Ukraine in economic development and for foreign direct investments. So my take on the state in the smartphone, or as the president puts this, is that I think it is incredibly important to make sure that the state in the smartphone is safe for citizens and businesses and is of good cybersecurity. So, and there are a lot of initiatives on introducing IT services that unfortunately were either blocked or not fully implemented for some reasons, even though the opportunity for fighting corruption when implemented properly is huge. So I think that the areas where it is critical to implement in a good way state in a smartphone are of course fighting raiding, right? So the situation when you can lose your companies and property because of some illegal recordings in the corporate or real estate registers. So this is a top priority to solve, to bring better protection of property rights. This anti-raiding is the first initiative. The second is, I think, subsoil is very important. Incredibly, lately this has been very transparent, even though we have launched together with the cabinet a pilot of electronic auctions on Prozora sale. There is still a lot to be done before the auction stage. So
for the sake of transparency and fairness of these auctions. Well, we have only 5 minutes left for the discussion, and I would like also us to focus on industry and businesses, because we know that in Ukraine, yes, if we want to develop our economy, the small and medium range businesses should prosper, right? But what are businesses being afraid of? Of the bureaucracy? They're being afraid of this numerous and constant inspections, and they're being afraid basically of these regulatory services. So could you please explain our audience what is being done for that matter? Let's talk more about these inspections.
So we like to focus on three activities or three directions to combat what you're saying. First, the rules should be adequate, right? So they should be fit for purpose. And this is what we talked before, changing the rules, improving the rules. Second, rules need to be understood. And this is what the video was about. We have developed a tool, an online service that provides information on how to open a business. We have won a number of awards for this. So you just pick a coffee shop, for instance, from the list, answer some questions, and you get a step-by-step manual what to do online, offline, how much to pay, etc. And the third issue, the third direction is, of course, ensuring that the enforcement is good, right? It's transparent, it's effective, it's efficient. So that's where we have been implementing the inspection reform, which is a transition from the paper system, where inspectors were finding and extracting bribes from businesses, to a risk management system, where inspectors are in inspections, are expected and evaluated their impact on risks and on negative events like fires, food poisonings, etc., etc. So,
and as far as I know, all the information is being registered in some kind of electronic platform, right? Electronic portal. So basically, everyone can follow up on some inspections that are pending to be processed, and some inspections that have already been implemented, right? So everyone can basically keep a track on the inspections and on their other businesses and also their competitors and the services that they would like to use in the future, right?
Yeah, so before all this data existed in cupboards, right? And now there is inspections.gov.ua website, which unites all of the inspection bodies where they plan inspections and report results of the inspections. And this is incredibly important for data mining, for transparency, and for the building of the risk management system. But also it's important to build a reputational economy. So a lot of times foreign investors and businesses that comply with regulations come to us and say, we pay taxes to the state, you have to protect us from competition that doesn't play by the rules. So the reputational economy, as implemented in part by the inspections.gov.ua, would allow businesses to feel financially motivated not to break the law, because then anybody with a phone, like consumers and businesses, when checking on Google where to go, would see that there's been citations and it's maybe unsafe to go to the business. And this might, well, change the rules of the game, right? And the businesses would finally feel the incentives to comply with the rules.
Well, let's hope that this change is going to bring a lot of progress for Ukraine. And thank you so much for your personal contribution to it. And thank you for being a guest today in our studio. That was Oleksii Dorogan, CEO of the Better Regulation Delivery Service. Stay tuned with UATV as we continue to cover the ongoing reforms in Ukraine, the current stage of ongoing reforms in Ukraine in the framework of the conference in Toronto, Canada.